Waw Disjunctive. In this chapter, we're going to look at a number of different things. Waw Disjunctive is one of them. We'll also look at the participle, and we'll look at a little more detail at what happens when words are in pause. We looked at that briefly quite a long time ago. And finally, we'll start to look again at pronominal suffixes on some other forms. So it's a bit of a catch-all chapter. But first of all, let's look at the Waw Disjunctive. Now, this is what we call a Waw when a sequence is broken. We've looked at past time narrative sequences, future time narrative sequences, and volative sequences. And basically what happens, and this is mostly for past time and future time narrative sequences, normally, get my paintbrush here, normally we have VSO word order, right? Just roughly speaking. We have the verb, then we have the subject, then we have the object. And we have a Waw often here of one sort or another, either that, often it's that, but it could also be this, okay? But we have a Waw here. Now, a sequence is broken when we have the Waw, and then we have something other than the verb that we would expect before we have the verb. So something comes in between here, okay, and it breaks the sequence. So X here, X here can be a noun, it can be a pronoun, which could be the subject, or it could be the object if the object is fronted to the beginning of the sentence. Maybe that's in focus, but that would break things, break the sequence. Could be noun, pronoun, a participle. Could be lo. We saw an example of that before. Lo meaning not. It could be an infinitive. Basically, something other than what you would expect to carry on the sequence. Now, sequences are broken for a number of reasons. We're going to look at four functions of Waw Disjunctive. What we mean by Waw Disjunctive is the Waw. We call this Waw here. We call this Waw, the Waw that comes before this piece that breaks the sequence. We call this Waw Disjunctive. It looks no different than this Waw here, than the normal Waw conjunctive. This is not a morphological name. This is just a naming of its function. So there are four reasons we'll look at why you get this. One is to introduce circumstantial information. Another is to introduce parenthetic information, which is really very similar. We'll make a fine distinction there. A third reason is to introduce a new paragraph or a new story, a new section. And the fourth is to draw contrast between two clauses. So let's take those one at a time. Start with the circumstantial. And we'll look at examples here. All these examples are from the chapter in Ross. So this is Genesis 18, verse 1. And I'll read it here. Vayera elav Adonai be'elone mamre v'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel, try to get all my stress right here, kechom hayom. Now, yera is a form we haven't seen before, but what the word means here, it's a preterite plus Waw consecutive, so normal past tense narrative sequence, and it means appeared. So the Lord appeared to him. Notice how we have V. This actually is indirect object. Right, appeared to him, and then we have subject over here. But we have Waw, or normal, we have a Waw and we have a verb with nothing in between, okay? So this is not disjunctive, this is normal. The Lord appeared to him, and this is by the oaks of Mamre, or the terebinths of Mamre. V'hu yoshev, so we have a Waw. Now who, I won't translate this for a moment, but he, here's our subject. Sorry, here's our verb. So verb is here, and this is our subject as a pronoun. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent, presumably his tent, as the day was getting hot. So here we have a Waw disjunctive because we have a Waw followed by something other than what we would expect to carry on the sequence, which is a preterite in this case, and then we have the verb later. So it's a Waw x and then our verb. So the way we want to translate this is the Lord appeared to him by the trees of Mamre. Now he was sitting, or maybe while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent as the day was getting hot. This here is telling us some information about the main clause. It tells us where Abraham was sitting. It tells us what he was doing when the Lord appeared to him. Okay? It tells us when the Lord appeared to him, when he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. So, a circumstantial clause that is introduced by this Waw disjunctive, Waw, something other than the verb you expect, and then the rest of the sentence. If it's circumstantial, it's going to give us extra information about the first clause, and it could be time information, and in which case you would translate it while or when or something like that. This one could be temporal, tells us why or when. The Lord appeared to him while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. It could be given place, like this one tells us where he was sitting. It could give concessive, or it could be concessive, meaning it's giving a concession. You have the main clause that says something, and you translate although something else. Okay. It could give the cause. So such and such because such something else, or manner. The following happened by something else. Someone did something by doing something else. So all these types of circumstantial clauses exist. But the main idea here is that this break in the sequence is there in order to provide more information that is sort of off the main narrative line, and it's extra information about this first clause. Now, the second function of Waw disjunctive is the parenthetic, to give parenthetic information. Now, this really is rather similar, I think, especially the example that we have here, rather similar to the circumstantial. It's not that different. But let me read this first. This is Genesis 13, verse 7. Vayhi Riv. Now, if you're reading along and you see Vayhi, you should know from a chapter or two ago that this sets it in the past, right? This is Haya plus, this is the predicate version of Haya, predicate form of Haya plus Vav consecutive. Okay? So, Riv is, let me read the whole thing. Vayhi Riv bein ro'e miknei Avram uvein ro'e miknei Lot v'haknaani v'haperizi az yoshev ba'aretz. So, Riv is struggle, perhaps, or strife. What does Ross do? Quarreling. Okay. There was quarreling between the herdsmen of the cattle of Abraham. Miknei can be sort of things you've acquired, but generally it means cattle, especially in this nomadic context here. So that there was quarreling between the herdsmen of the cattle of Abraham and the way Hebrew deals with between is to repeat the word between, and the herdsmen of the cattle of Lot. So you got this quarreling going on between these two groups. V'haknaani and the Canaanites, v'haperizi and the Perizzites, as at that time Yoshev ba'aretz, were dwelling in the land. This here we have Vav, then we have verb, then we have our rest of our stuff. There was, in fact, a subject, right? There was a quarrel, or quarreling between them. So this is our normal order, VS, and then whatever else, and our Vav. Nothing in between here. Nothing between the Vav and the verb. You get down here, and we have Vav followed by something other than a verb. So we have here a noun. And we got another one, actually. And then we have a adverb, as, and before we get to our verb. So our verb's way down here. So this is a disjunctive clause. And this is providing circumstantial or parenthetic information. Sorry, not circumstantial. Now, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land at that time. In a way, it's somewhat circumstantial. It's telling you when this event happened, right? The quarreling was happening at the time, during those days, when the Canaanites and the Perizzites were still in the land. But it's a bit more distant. It's not directly modifying this clause. Unlike the Abraham one, here, this tells us Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent when the Lord appeared to him. The Lord appeared to him when or where? What was he doing? Well, this modifies directly. The Lord appeared to him, Abraham, and this modifies it directly. This is a bit of a looser connection. Something was going on. There was quarreling between these two groups, and it was at the time when the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. Not a lot of difference between circumstantial and parenthetic, but maybe a little bit. In either case, they both provide extra information that's off the main storyline, and that information is introduced with this vav followed by something other than a verb, other than the verb you would expect. So the sequence is broken, and then it'll come back later with another vav, or with another preterite plus vav consecutive. We'll go down here, and then you'll know you're back on the main line again, the main storyline. This here would often be translated with now. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. The third use or function of Waw Disjunctive is to introduce a new section, or an initial clause, Ross calls it. Here's an example from Genesis 4, verse 1. V'ha'adam yada et Chava ishto, and it goes on. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife. Chava is Eve in Hebrew. His wife, and she conceived and gave birth to a son, and whatever. This is Genesis 4, verse 1. This is how that new section starts. This is after the garden scene, after they're kicked out. Now we're going to start something new. We're going to start the story of their progeny. What happens with Cain and Abel and all the rest. So it's introduced not with a vav, or not with a preterite plus vav consecutive, but with a vav followed by the noun, the subject, and then the verb. Okay, something other than the verb is in there. So new sections, new paragraphs, new stories, whatever, can be started with a Waw Disjunctive. Okay, I should have added a little more here because I think this is a vav. This is a vav or a preterite plus vav consecutive. Probably she conceived. So here you would be beginning or continuing your storyline. It starts here with a Waw Disjunctive, but it continues here. Too bad I didn't put that in. Anyway, you can look it up. The last example, or last function that Ross gives, and there are more, but these are some basic ones, is contrastive. And this is particularly true in poetry, where a Waw Disjunctive is used to contrast two clauses. And this is from Psalm 1, verse 6. Ki yodea Adonai derech tzadikim atnach. These are very useful, these atnachs. They tell you the clause is ending, or more than likely. And so look out for the next clause. And in fact, we have it here. We have a Waw Disjunctive. V'derech rashaim toved. So, the Lord knows the way of the righteous. Something, the way of the evil, will perish. Is that right? Is that how Ross deals with it? The way of the wicked will perish, whatever. But here we have vav, we have derech, so this is not a verb, and then this actually is the adjective modified, the way of the evil, the way of the evil, and then we finally get our verb down here. So Waw Disjunctive. And the way you'd want to translate this is with some sort of contrastive, a but. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Not and. And doesn't bring across the right sense here. So, Waw Disjunctive is when you have Waw plus something other than the verb you would expect in order to continue the sequence. And then you have the rest of your material. And it's used for adding extra information, whether it's circumstantial or parenthetic, whether it's closely tied to the main clause or it's more loosely tied, to introduce new sections and to show a contrast between two things. And notice in this case, they're all nouns, I think. Nouns and pronouns. Derech is a noun that's fronted, that comes between the Waw and the verb. Actually, a noun and a adverb, or adjective, substantive adjective. Oops, wrong way. This one, ha'adam, a noun, and the subject as well. Noun and subject. Here we have two nouns, okay? Just a double occurrence of this. And again, it's a subject. And here, again, or a pronoun, but it is the subject. So often the subject will be fronted. Sometimes you'll get the object in there, which means that you have a disjunctive arrangement, but you also have an emphasis on the object. The object is of particular importance, wants to be highlighted. So that's how you can break sequences, and that's why, or the function, why you break them.